Okay, so what if I told you that the one thing you've been taught to fear is actually one of your body's greatest assets? Yeah, I'm talking about fat. In this explainer, we're going to tear down that whole myth of evil fat and uncover the surprising and frankly incredible truth about what it really does for you. I promise, you're about to see your own body in a whole new light.
So let's just get right to it. Is fat really the villain it's made out to be? I mean, we're all trained to think of it that way, right? Something you have to fight, to lose, to just get rid of. But from a biological and especially from an evolutionary point of view, that couldn't be further from the truth.
I mean, look at this. On one hand, you have the story we're all told. Fat is the bad guy, the villain. But the reality? It's much more like this unsung hero over here. A super complex, really dynamic tissue that is, and I mean this, absolutely critical for human survival. It's time we get to know this hero a little better.
All right, Section 1, more than meets the eye. To really get what fat is all about, we gotta look past the mirror, you know? We need to get down to the science of it all. So, what is this stuff anyway?
Okay, so the scientific name for body fat is adipose tissue. And here's something that might surprise you. It's actually classified as a type of connective tissue. It's literally that soft, kind of padded layer right under your skin and all wrapped around your internal organs.
And if you could zoom way in on this tissue, you'd see it's made up of these cells called adipocytes. Just think of them as these tiny little warehouses. And their main job is to store energy in the form of something called triglycerides, all ready to go whenever your body needs a power boost.
All right, so that's what it is. Now let's talk about where it came from. Section 2, our ancestors' secret weapon. Because far from being some modern-day problem, fat was actually a secret weapon for survival.
I mean, this stuff is a serious multitasker. It's not just about storing energy. No way. It gives us insulation when it's cold, it cushions our vital organs, it even acts like a gland, secreting critical hormones. Heck, it can even produce its own heat. It does so much more than we give it credit for.
So think about it from our ancestors' perspective, right? For hunter-gatherers living in a total feast or famine world, no refrigerators, no grocery stores, this ability to store energy on their bodies was an absolute lifeline. It's what fueled those long, grueling hunts and helped them survive when there just wasn't any food to be found.
And check this out. Just get a load of this number. A fairly lean person can store around 100,000 calories as fat. 100,000. Let that sink in for a second. That is enough energy to keep you going for weeks. It's basically a biological insurance policy that helped keep our entire species from going extinct.
Okay, let's switch gears a bit. Section 3, a tale of two sexes. We all know that men and women tend to store fat differently, right? Well, that's not random. It turns out there's some really powerful evolutionary reasons for that.
So if you look at the numbers, a typical healthy body fat percentage for a guy is somewhere in the 10 to 15% range. For a woman, it's more like 20 to 25%. That is a big difference. And like I said, it's definitely not an accident.
So why the difference? Well, it boils down to too many things. First up, you got hormones. Testosterone generally reduces fat, while estrogen kind of promotes it. But the biggest factor, the real game changer, is reproduction. Females evolved to store extra energy, a whole lot of extra energy, for the massive caloric needs of pregnancy and breastfeeding. It was all about making sure both mom and baby could survive, especially when food was scarce.
All right, so we've talked about why we have fat. But did you know not all fat is created equal? Seriously, we can actually categorize it by color, and each color does a totally different job. Let's get into it.
So you've got white fat and brown fat. White fat is the stuff we have most of as adults. The best way to think about it is like insulation in a house. It keeps you warm by trapping heat, but it doesn't make heat. Brown fat, though, that's the body's personal space heater. It actively burns fuel just to generate warmth, which is why babies have so much of it.
So how does this little heater actually work? It's pretty amazing, really. The mitochondria, the little power plants in these brown fat cells, have this unique protein. And what it does is it basically short-circuits the normal energy-making process. So instead of making the usual energy for the cell, it just generates and releases heat directly. It's this incredible adaptation that helps babies stay warm since they can't really shiver effectively.
Okay, so we've covered color. Next up, it's all about location, location, location. Because where your fat is stored is just as important as what color it is.
So we basically have two main storage locations. First, there's subcutaneous fat. That's the layer right under your skin. You know, the stuff you can literally pinch. Then you have visceral fat. That's the deeper stuff. The fat that's packed in around your internal organs, acting like a protective cushion. But here's what you've got to remember, and this is super important. No matter where it is, this fat isn't just sitting there doing nothing. It's incredibly active. It acts like an endocrine organ, producing and releasing crucial hormones like leptin, which helps control your hunger, and even estrogen. So fat isn't just some passive storage blob. It's a major active player in your body's entire chemical system.
So, all this brings us to our final and maybe the most important idea for understanding fat today. I call it the Goldilocks principle.
And it's pretty simple, really. You don't want too little of it, you don't want too much of it. You want it in the right amounts. Fat is 100% essential for your body to work correctly. But, just like with almost everything in biology, it's all about balance. It has to be just right.
So this leads to the big question, doesn't it? If fat isn't the villain, what happens when we have too much? Why does the hero of our evolutionary story sometimes seem to cause so many problems in the modern world? Well, that's a great question, and we'll dive into that in our next explainer.